One, two, three. One, two, three. Go ahead, Yokima. You can come up now. So part of my lesson today is going to be spent on. It's called the song called "Amazing Grace." So Yokima's going to play the first part for us, and you'll find out why as I go along. Why I chose that song. That was part of our teaching on redeemed to serve Elohim. I'll show that the title in a little bit. Thank you, Okima. So today's title is called "Redeemed to Serve Elohim," and you see there it's a picture of the barley, or could be wheat, hay, but I'd have to think that that's probably Ruth, possibly, what they're trying to represent. So it's probably the barley harvest. And, the little bit of the story of Ruth, most of us have read that a few times, I'm sure. And, but I won't really be talking too much about that. I will mention a little bit about how that has to do with going from slavery to redemption. So there you go, redeemed to serve Elohim. Because that's really why we're here today. That's really what, where we want to do. That's who we want to become. We want to become more people who can serve him in every situation. And that's not always going to look the same every single time. Each context will require a different way. But again, what we want to do is we want to serve him out of our whole hearts. And slavery today, as we know, is generally taboo. Right? You just don't. We don't really talk about slavery like they did back then. And I know that the reality is you can make a case that slavery is going on again today in a different way. It's still this, some of it's still the same, the taskmasters, all of that, but doesn't seem so brutal, okay, supposedly. So why would we be talking about it today at all? In fact, do the scriptures really talk about it? And we know they do, because we read about it in Leviticus. So slavery, as most of us probably know, was nothing new to most believers in Jesus or in Yeshua. There's some people making a case that because of Christians, maybe that's why slavery got started. But I'm going to talk about the other side of that. And this song that Yokima played for us, and most of us know, was written by John Newton. So I'm going to give you a little bit of more, and especially a little more history into Canada, especially those of you who maybe didn't know this before. And this was new to me as I was studying to prepare for today. And so John Newton, who was also instrumental in helping William Wilberforce abolished slavery in England. How many of you have at least heard of Wilberforce before? Yes. Okay. And now, of course, then John Newton wrote Amazing Grace. William Wilberforce helped abolish slavery. How are they connected? So, how then do we get to a day where slavery, as far as we are taught in schools, is abolished? We need to go back to the time of John Newton and William Wilberforce. As I was doing some research on them to see how they're connected, so I first saw some history on John Newton, the author of Amazing Grace. He grew up without a mother, as she died when John Newton was 6 years old. But she taught him, she was a good Christian woman, all right? She taught him about scripture and hymns. Unfortunately, because it seemed like for whatever reason the father maybe wasn't as involved or for some reason. And as time went on, he became reckless and hard and a foul-mouthed man who saw no need for God. He worked on ships that were used for the slave trade. In 1748, however, that all changed, as the ship he was on was wrecked, and he prayed to Elohim in desperation to save him. Not because he remembered his mother teaching him about God, about song, about hymns, about being, about being a good Christian, but because he realized that he was in a desperate situation. So it wasn't that he knew God, but out of the reality that he had nowhere else to turn, he eventually accepted Jesus, Yeshua, as his Savior. And he continued working in the slave trade business for a few years. Of course, because of what happened, as time went by, his heart began to feel for the slaves. He was helping to sell and treated, that probably changed a little now, but he still treated, before he treated so cruelly. Eventually, he could not handle the lifestyle anymore. He then became a pastor of a congregation in Olney under the Church of England. Amazing Grace is about his life that he saw as God lifted him from, and now he was able to walk in freedom. Now you see this picture here, you can see it all right. It's I'll give a few more details about when Wilberforce first tried to abolish slavery in Great Britain and England at that time. But there you'll see that in 1834, you notice it was abolished in the British dominions utterly and forever. So that's when it was finally no longer something that was supposed to be under the British Dominion. And one of the tenets of John Newton's church was William Wilberforce. There, now you have the connection. Wilberforce attended the church in Olney and was saved somewhere in the year of 1784 to 85. He called John Newton his spiritual advisor. This same John Newton, who previously was a slave trader and then repented of his sin. William Wilberforce and 7 other men started the Proclamation Society and the Society for Effecting the Abolition of the Slave Trade. Later, these men would become known as the Clapham Sect. In 1797, Wilberforce, by this point, was already involved in the government of England at this time. And not only was he involved in other areas, his main concern was the abolishment of the slave trade, which included overseas operations as well. In 1792, William Wilberforce tried to pass a bill for the abolishment of the slave trade, and it was defeated 163 to 88. And some of this may have to do with the fact that during that time, there was a war going on with Napoleon. So they were more focused on trying to win that war than deciding what's morally right for Great Britain and all of every place that it had dominion over. He would try again in 1807, and this time it passed with thunderous hurrahs by 283 to 16. Later, as you see up there, he would include this bill to be over the other British dominions, and Canada eventually becoming one of them. As you know, right, there was still a war between Wolfe and Montgomery. Wolfe won in the Plains of Abraham. Yes, if you go to, some of you grew up there, probably, maybe you've been there. I haven't been there. There's a place in Quebec called the Plains of Abraham, which I think is very interesting. Anyway, this is why you notice that in Canada, we've never really seen anything like the slave trade, how it was back then, all right? And for a little more Canadian history, this is probably one of the reasons why there was a train running from the United States to Canada for the slaves to escape. Because once the slaves were in Canada, they had their freedom from the slave owners. So a person in Canada who they ran to, and let's say they got a job with them working or something like that, they had no legal right to be able to send them back to the slave owner in the States. So just as Elohim wrote in the scriptures for Israel, and the slaves would now be protected from their slave owners. So again, we see an interesting connection there between how Israel was taught what they were supposed to do and who they were supposed to be, and how they were supposed to treat slaves, all right? And this is how many miles away, right? This is almost the other side of Israel when you look at the world. So how then am I connecting the song Amazing Grace, with the abolishment of the slave trade in 1807 and further in 1834? If we remember before we were born, the sin of Adam and Hava was passed on to us. How did this happen? Since man was free and created to serve Elohim, taking care of the earth Elohim had made, when Adam and Hava chose to eat of the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, they had now chosen the dominion of Satan. For Elohim told them to be fruitful and multiply. Their progeny, all of us here, would now be a slave to sin, as opposed to the freedom Adam and Hava had as slaves to Elohim before. Okay? You could still say they were slaves, but they had freedom, right? Whether we like to admit it or not, are already under the dominion of the adversary. This means that we had no hope of escaping the punishment of eternal separation from Elohim before we were saved. Our situation was such that the only hope for our freedom to life was that someone would redeem us. Garrett, if you can come read Genesis 3:15. Thank you. Maybe you have it memorized. And Christopher, if you can read the next one, is Isaiah 24:13. And then go ahead. Oh, sorry, down there. Down there, Garrett.
I will put hostility between you and the woman, and between your seed and her seed. He will strike your head, and you will strike his heel.
Thank you, Garrett. Sorry. 1, 2. Sorry, I think I... It's something when I touch it. There we go. Okay, go ahead. Christopher, go ahead. 24:13. Thank you. And Andrew, if you want to read 24:23.
Isaiah 24:13. Is it?
Yeah.
When thus it shall be in the midst of the land among the people, there shall be as the shaking of an olive tree, and as the gleaning grapes when the vintage is done.
Thank you.
Isaiah 24:23. The glory of the moon will wane, and the brightness of the sun will fade. For the Lord of heaven's armies will rule on Mount Zion. He will rule in the greater glory in Jerusalem, in the sight of all the leaders of his people.
Thank you, Andrew. All right. So if we consider the fact that John Newton was at a time and place in his life where he had no hope to rescue himself, we also have no hope of rescuing ourselves. His ship had been wrecked, and there was nothing he could do to fix it. We as humans conceived by fallen humans all came into this world wrecked. And just as John Newton could not fix his seemingly immediate death, because that's where he felt he was. We were dead before. In our case, we were dead before we were born. Elohim then rescued John Newton from his plight. He could also rescue us from our other plight, since Elohim began working in his heart when he rescued him from what could have been a fateful day. He would, through this event, repent and come to believe in what Yeshua did for him on the cross, knowing that his salvation is secured because Yeshua is acting as our high priest. He went from a slave of sin to a slave of Yeshua, or Jesus as they called them back then. Some people still do today. And now as a slave of Yeshua, he could live in freedom. So, and as our Leviticus 25:38 portion talks about, when a man of Israel became so poor he could not redeem himself, he was forced to sell himself either his owner, whether a Jew or a sojourner. He could not be sold permanently, however. It is interesting to see the parallels of Yeshua right in our text. This Hebrew slave had to be given freedom in the Jubilee year. And the owner was not to treat him with rigor, but was to treat him as one who respects Elohim. Likewise, if a sojourner became rich and an Israelite had to sell him to the sojourner or outsider, the sojourner was expected to give him his freedom in the Jubilee year, just as the Israelite had for his brother. However, if he had a family member who became rich, they could purchase the freedom of their relative from the sojourner, or it could be an uncle's son, or a family member that is kin to him. The reckoning was based on the number of years until the Jubilee. The man could also redeem himself, should he acquire sufficient funds to do so. Now, why? The question then is, why did they have to purchase? Why did your freedom have to be purchased? And so, let's keep going here. Notice that he had to purchase from the owner his freedom. For as a slave, he had no rights to act on his own. When you have a taskmaster, and if you're actually somebody's slave, you have no right to say to them, oh, I don't want to do this, or I want to do that, I need this day off, I need that day off. Everything you do is what that person says, and that's it. You're not supposed to in any way talk back or act as though, no, I don't need to do that, I don't need to listen to you. So therefore, he was required to buy back his freedom. And when the eternal Yeshua defeated death by rising and ascending, his death and resurrection purchased for us the very thing that we could not do on our own. So the kindred redeemer was acting on behalf of his family to rescue him from slavery. So there you go. There's in our portion already, we see a very real fact of this one that had to rescue, the family member. Right, and when we come to believe in Yeshua, through adoption, through our faith, we become adopted into his family. So now it's like we are part of his family, just as if as Israelite, whether they were one who was born a Jew or one who was going through and then started to believe in the God of Israel, they were to be treated the same way. There was no difference on how God saw a man who believed in him or woman who believed in him would be treated, whether they were physically Jew or not. It was based on your faith. Of course, however, the physical Jews, as we see, are used to help us better understand how it works. And so God chose them as the ones who we would become part of. So you ask then why the Jubilee year was the slave allowed to have his freedom. Elohim had chosen Israel to be his covenant people for all eternity because they were already owned by him. No one had the authority to do as they chose with them. He had already purchased them, and we as Goyim are included in Israel. The same rule would have also applied to those who joined themselves to Israel. And one good example of this, as I showed earlier, go back. There we go, is the story of Ruth, who was redeemed by Boaz. Now, interesting, we know that originally Ruth was not a Hebrew, but she believed in the God of Israel. She goes with Naomi through her faith. Then Naomi accepts her. Now because she was married to one of Naomi's sons earlier, she's considered one of her children. So Boaz is now, as you know in Ruth, he actually is able to be her redeemer, her kinsman redeemer. You know a little bit of the story, right? The one who should have redeemed her didn't want to, and Boaz is the next in line. So, but if you look at our Haftarah today, I must admit, it was a bit challenging to see the connection. Except that in the Elohim shows that he is the owner of all things, and that is why I had us read verses 13 and 23 of Isaiah 24 today. The moon and the sun shall be confounded when Yod-Heh-Vaveh Zavaot shall reign for eternity from Jerusalem. And mine says, ancients gloriously. Elohim, as the owner of all things, will bring to pass exactly what he said in his time. Isaiah 24, verse 23. And it's Elohim. So now going back to the fact that we're redeemed, his people from their sin too. So that would be us. Elohim will also redeem this earth to fulfill the very purpose of its creation for all eternity. And it's not that he couldn't just wad it all up and start over. He obviously has the power to do it. It'd be nothing to him. But I personally think that just like he's doing for us, okay, he's redeeming us so we can serve him today. One day we will have a completely transformed body that won't have all the things we get to deal with today. So we can see now, so if you look at this, so Elohim is the leader. Yeshua, who's the Son of God, and obviously Peter believes this. So if I'm Peter, and here Yeshua is wanting to get down to clean my feet, and I look at you and go, but you're the son of, how can the son of the creator of the universe become so low that he would wash my feet? Right? It's a bit perplexing. It's a bit like, something's wrong. Well, something's wrong here, right? So in those days, and it still would be today, those countries that still have this, it was the slaves, or also called servants, who would wash the feet of other people. Yeshua, their master, was acting in a way subservient to them. It is contrary to all custom at that time to see this happen. Yeshua did this to show them that he, a free man, came to serve them. We too are now free to serve those who are equal to us in belief, and also to those who have authority over us. He had the freedom to do so, and so do we. So just like there, you see Ruth, right? There she is. She's going to go in, and she's starting to pick, right, the barley. And not because she had to, because if you look at, right, she really cared about Naomi so much. She was willing to do it for Naomi. It wasn't like Naomi's like, you better get out there and do it, or else, here's my ball and chain. I'm going to drag you out there, and you better start picking these things. No, it didn't work that way. She wanted to be with Naomi so bad, she was willing to, when they got to a place where there was food, to go and work out of her own accord. Now, obviously, still Naomi was over her, so Naomi still had something to say about it, but Ruth was willing to get out and do that. Oops. So I'm going to go to the next ones here. Is in 2 Chronicles. I'll find that one here. 36, verse 21. And it was interesting, as I'm looking for it, I'll just tell you. We were actually finished this week reading 2 Chronicles with our family. And it talks about how the Sabbath has its rest for 70 years. And at the end of 70 years is when King Cyrus says, okay, any Jew with your family and your servants and your donkeys, your horses, whatever you have, can go back to Jerusalem and start rebuilding the temple. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that too, about that history as well, how we got there. Okay. Let me find it here. So there we go. It's 36, verse 21. In fulfillment of the word of Yod-Heh-Vaveh by the mouth of Jeremiah, till the land had paid back her Shabbat rest. For as long as it lay desolate, the Shabbat rest was kept till 70 years were complete. Now, in the first year of King Cyrus of Persia, fulfilling the word of Yod-Heh-Vaveh by the mouth of Jeremiah, Yod-Heh-Vaveh stirred up the spirit of King Cyrus of Persia, so that he sent a proclamation throughout all his kingdom, and also put it in writing, saying, Thus says King Cyrus of Persia, Yod-Heh-Vaveh, the Elohim of heaven, has given me all the kingdoms of the earth. He has appointed me to build him a house in Jerusalem, which is in Judah. Whoever among you of all his people may go up, and may Yod-Heh-Vaveh, his Elohim, be with him. So, here they are. So mentions that his land had to enjoy her Sabbaths for 70 years, or rested. Why this be relevant to our study? Jeremiah had predicted that Elohim had to give the land rest because his people who lived there had not allowed it to rest as they were told to. The land had become enslaved to the very people who were to take care of it. And Elohim, who keeps the very smallest word, kept his word for the land. The land was now able to support its people again. And they were allowed now to return to the land at the exact time. So if you look at the history, as we just read here, you know that Israel, one of the things they did against their land, against Elohim, was they did not allow their land to rest. Another reason why they were kicked out. God said specifically, talking about Israel, you must give the land its rest. Now, we're not in Israel, so right, it doesn't apply to us that's exact same way. But because they were there in his land that he gave to them, they were disobedient. They were enslaving the land with whatever they wanted. They kept every year, more likely like we do, right? Every year they would expect the land to grow. They would plant something. But like us, who are supposed to rest on the Shabbat, and I believe Brother Llewell talked about this a little bit last week, we too were expected, the land needs to have its rest. So if we are not allowing the land to rest, just like if you look at the Egyptians, how they were treating Israel, the Jews, they made it very tough on them to get any rest, to have any kind of time off that they wanted with their families, even probably for the Sabbath day, right? So, again, the connection between the physical land and us who are created in his image. So yes, again, we see that Elohim has all things under his control, regardless of our belief in him. And I'll also mention this too. So the other day, Yokema was doing her own personal devotions, and she does them at night. And she happened to come across this one that actually talks about this idea of, right, God moves the heart. So, and she, from that, figured out that even a person who doesn't believe in the God that we believe in, God will still move that person's heart. We won't see it. The person who doesn't believe in him can't see it. But God is still using them. So, and in Isaiah, Maddie, if you can come read for us Isaiah. Yokima, you'll be next. Maddie, if you can read for us Isaiah 44:28. Yokima, Isaiah 45, verse 1. If you want to come to the mic here, sorry, Maddie. Thank you. So we can all hear you.
It is I who says of Cyrus, he is my shepherd, and he will carry out of my desire. And he says of Jerusalem, she will build, and of the temple your foundation will be laid.
Thank you, Maddie. Go ahead, Yokima. Carlos. You're next. You go. Can you read? It's okay. Oh, it's okay. I'll read it. So 45 verse 1, Yokima. Oh, sorry, 44 verse 28. Oh, sorry, 45 verse 1. Sorry.
The Lord says this to Cyrus, his anointed, whose right hand I have grasped, to subdue nations before him, to disarm kings, to open doors before him, and even city gates will not be shut.
Thank you, Yokima. All right, I'll read verse 13. And it says here, I stirred Cyrus up in righteousness and I will level all his roads. He will build my city and set my exiles free with no price or bribe, says Yodevave Zavaot. So he didn't have to pay them. He didn't give them and say, okay, you did this, I'll give you this. You know, it wasn't anything like that. He literally allowed them to go free, just like it says that at the end of the Jubilee, at the end of the certain amount of time, even the slaves themselves, earlier in our text in Leviticus talks about that they were to be given everything that was theirs, was supposed to be given back to them. They had their freedom completely. They were able to, manage on their own and not continue as slaves. So, we too, after Elohim finished in our lives what he intends, through circumstances that will allow us the opportunity to accept the death of his perfect Son on the cross as a ransom for our sins. This Son, now risen from the dead and interceding on our behalf, has given us the rest we need by accepting him. Just as the land was given its rest, the land freed from slavery was able to fill again its purpose. We too are freed from sin and death to be able to fulfill again its purpose, our original purpose, by keeping the Shabbat and the rest of the appointed times freed by Yeshua. He's now able to dwell with us again, as he had intended for Israel to always be. Because notice they built the temple, right? The temple was built again. The first time, of course, we know was far greater. In fact, if you read the rest of, I believe it does talk about it there. Some of those different reactions to the foundation of the temple being rebuilt again. Some of them were overjoyed. Some of them were crying because they thought it would be the same as what Solomon had built. But Solomon had so much wealth and power, and Cyrus, gave even what Nebuchadnezzar had taken to help them. So it just wasn't going to be the same. So you can't blame them for some of them feeling sad about it, because they had remembered years ago, 70 years ago, or when they saw it last, and looking at this new one in comparison would be, if we knew something greater before, then we live and we see a new one built, we're like, we would really have to be like, no, I'm going to have joy anyway, even though it's not exactly what it was before. Take that determination to do that. So to help us understand a little more where they're coming from. So they are now given by Elohim through King Cyrus the decree to rebuild the temple as free men. And again, you see there's Ruth. There she's out, free to go and pick the barley. It's just as John Newton relates in the song Amazing Grace, and William Wilberforce helped this song to become true for all under the dominion of Great Britain, true under the countries and those who lived there. Upon the victory of the abolition of the slave trade, and let's go to Romans 6:17-18. And this talks about how we went from being slaves to sin to slaves of righteousness. But thanks be to Elohim that though you were slaves of sin, you wholeheartedly obeyed the form of teaching under which you were placed. And after you were set free from sin, you became enslaved to righteousness. And I want to end with Isaiah 62 verses 1-3 that talk about that's why Yeshua came to this earth. And actually, sorry, it should be 61. Sorry, my bad. The Ruach of Yod-Heh-Vaveh Elohim is on me, because Yod-Heh-Vaveh has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim liberty to the captives, and the opening of the prison to those who are bound, to proclaim the year of Yodevav's favor, and the day of Elohim's vengeance, to comfort all who mourn, to console those who mourn in Zion, to give them beauty for ashes, the oil of joy for mourning, the garment of praise for the spirit of heaviness, that they might be called oaks of righteousness, the planting of Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh, that he may be glorified. And we'll read 62 as well as 1 to 3. For Zion's sake, I will not keep silent. For Jerusalem's sake, I will not rest until righteousness shines out brightly, and her salvation as a blazing torch. Nations will see your righteousness, into all kings your glory. You will be called by a new name, which Yod-Heh-Vav's mouth will bestow. You also will be a crown of beauty in the hand of Yod-Heh-Vav, a royal diadem in the hand of your Elohim. So there we are. First, he came to set us free, so that one day, again, now he can rule and reign in us the way that he intended. So now we are redeemed to serve him.